Detroit Jewish Book Fair. My name is Brenda Brook, and I'm Book Fair Chair. And it's my pleasure to welcome you on this Monday afternoon to Widowish, a Memoir by Melissa Gould. This is the 70th anniversary of the Detroit Jewish Book Fair, and we're celebrating with an entire year of book and story programming. Join us as we honor the world's first Jewish book fair, highlighting diverse authors, curating new Jewish writing, and promoting the global art of Jewish storytelling. Our festival week, which continues through Sunday, November 14th, is just the beginning. Be sure to come back all year for exceptional opportunities to engage with the best of Jewish books and authors. To see our full event schedule, watch events you may have missed, or find our online bookstore where you can find Widowish, a Memoir, and plenty of other hand-selected books and gifts, please visit our website at culturalarts.jcc.org book fair. If you enjoy this event and other book fair events, please consider becoming a patron or donating to Book Fair. You can do either or both at our website, again, culturalarts.jcc.det.org/book fair. We rely on community support to make this annual event possible, so thank you in advance for becoming part of our family. The Book Fair team would like to thank the following for their support. Our day supporters are Esther and Neil Zelenko, and our supporter, the Jewish Family Service of Metro Detroit. I also want to extend my deepest gratitude to the whole Book Fair committee. Their dedication, innovation, commitment, and hard work have made all of this possible. We have an inspiring discussion for you this afternoon, and we want you to be part of it. You can ask questions and offer comments in the YouTube comment section below, or by texting the number to the number in the corner of your screen. Our speakers will take as many of your questions as they can. And while you're here at our YouTube channel, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the reminder bell. That way you'll never miss any of our exciting events. The focus of today's event is Widowish, a Memoir. We have with us the author of the book, Melissa Gould, as well as Rabbi Joseph Krakoff of Jewish Hospice and Chaplaincy Network, who will moderate the discussion. A modern take on loss, Widowish illuminates the twists of fate that break our world, the determination that keeps us moving forward, and the surprises in life that we never see coming. Melissa's personal journey through grief and beyond includes unlikely inspiration from an evangelical preacher, the calming presence of some Real Housewives, and the unexpected attention of a charming musician. Melissa Gould is an award-winning screenwriter, writing for TV shows and network TV movies, and leading workshops and seminars on grief, meditation, and writing. Melissa's life as a parenting expert, also known as mompreneur, resulted in several branded columns on major industry websites. In this capacity, she appeared on such shows as Rachel Ray, Access Hollywood, KTLA's Morning Show, and many other infotainment programs. Rabbi Joseph Krakoff is the Senior Director of the Jewish Hospice and Chaplaincy Network. He is also the author with Dr. Michelle Sider of Never Long Enough, Finding Comfort and Hope Amidst Grief and Loss. Please join me in welcoming Melissa Gould and Rabbi Joseph Krakoff.
Thanks, Brenda. Melissa, welcome. It's so great to have you at the Detroit Jewish Book Fair.
Thank you so much. It's so nice to be here.
Great. Well, I think I want to jump right into the book, and I want to really jump right into, I've got lots of questions for you, and certainly I want to encourage our viewers to add questions as we go along. But, you know, it's true that no one knows what to make of the widow. And I imagine even more so a widow in her 40s. Why don't you start with a passage from the book, if you wouldn't mind, just to bring us into your beautiful, beautiful memoir.
Thank you so much. Okay. There was an expectation about the widow. Am I sad enough? Is it okay to see me smile? Am I allowed to feel happy? I felt like I was failing at widowhood. I missed my husband, but no one knew that when they looked at me. They just saw a mom with blonde highlights, going to yoga, picking up her daughter from school, buying groceries at Trader Joe's, and now I was at a party with a date when I should have been home grieving all alone. I didn't look like a widow. I wasn't acting like a widow, but I felt like a widow. I guess I was just widowish.
So I wonder if you could share with us, what does a widow look like if we were to open her up and see her heart and see her soul? What does she look like from your own personal experience?
Wow, starting with a really interesting question. I think the thing about widows and grief and loss, it goes back to that expression that I will not be able to quote accurately, but you don't know a person's story until you walk in their shoes. And I think that widows come in all shapes and sizes. Traditionally, I think universally, society expects widows to be much older when they suffer their loss. Dressed in black, with possibly a veil, with a handkerchief, tears flowing at all times. And I think if you were to open us up, maybe you would see that on the inside, that real serious, unrelenting grief. But in my case, I was an only parent. My husband and I had a child, Sophie. She was 13 when he died. And I felt like I had to keep her going. I had to keep her on track. She motivated me to live my life every day. And because of that, I was out in the world. And exactly what I just read, I would be at Trader Joe's, or I'd be picking her up from school, or I'd be trying to keep her on track. And people didn't know what my experience was because I was out in the world. I wasn't hiding, not even hiding, but I wasn't at home with the curtains drawn, bereft. I was those things, but just people didn't know that or think of that when they saw me because I was younger and an active mom in our community. So there were these disparate kind of ideas about widowhood that I write about in Widowish.
Yeah. So I know that November 1st was Joel's 8th yard site.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering how, as his yard site comes about each year, as November 1st comes about each year, and as you sort of anticipate the grief that you feel today, many years removed, but still very, very strongly and connected to the grief. How do you mark his yard site?
First of all, I light a candle every year with photos of him. And I feel like my intention with Joel and honoring the life that he lived and that we had together is I talk about him every single day. So when his yard site comes around once a year, I feel as if I've honored him the entire year. I've marked his life the entire year. Some years, like you said, it's been 8 years. Some years are really hard and hit me in ways that I can't believe. Where I feel like it was like he may have. It feels like he may have just died that morning, But other times it's just like, oh, that's right. I have to remind myself because there are days throughout the year where I think traditionally when it comes to grief, people expect to feel it on birthdays, anniversaries, certain calendar events throughout the year that you kind of anticipate as I'm going to be really sad that day. But the truth is, for me, it could be a random Tuesday in March that I'm completely bereft and grief-stricken out of the blue. And then when a day like his birthday or his yard site comes around or our wedding anniversary, I'm okay. And that's the thing about grief. I think it is very unpredictable. And you just don't know what it's going to feel like and when.
Right. I mean, grief is, and I want to talk more about grief as we go along, but there's no question that grief is not linear.
Right.
And that grief sort of can continue to affect you and really just be there when you least expect it, and sometimes when you most expect it, and you see something, you hear something, a memory comes up, and boom, you're back in that. I want to come back to that, but I actually want to talk about, as we sort of really talk about his illness, and I know he had the MS first before the illness that ultimately took his life.
Right.
How did you define quality of life when he was diagnosed with MS? And how did your understanding of quality of life evolve as he got sicker based on the illness that he ultimately died from, West Nile?
Well, Joel was an extremely active person, and he was 45 when he was diagnosed with MS. And we were familiar with MS. MS is not a disease people die from typically, but it does complicate, your immune system and things like that. But he was extremely mobile. He was extremely active. And MS affects a person's mobility for the most part. I mean, all of these autoimmune diseases affect people differently, but the umbrella diagnosis, I guess, about MS is it affects your mobility. So quality of life meant that Joel was and would continue to be completely self-sufficient, that he could walk our daughter to school, that he could drive safely to work, that he could go, he was in the music industry, so that he could go to a concert and stand up for 3 hours watching his favorite bands play. We didn't think that quality of life would ever be compromised, even with the MS diagnosis, because Joel was very physically fit. His health was always a priority, but the MS has a way of taking those things away. The things that made Joel started to get kind of removed, and he was no longer able to be as self-sufficient as he had been. And to the both of us, that's how his quality of life really changed. But really the most important thing, again, was his self-sufficiency. And towards the end of his life, when the MS was really starting to affect him, and it had only been about 5 years, we really were facing some challenges that we could not have anticipated. His medication wasn't working as well. All of the things that the doctors were trying to sort of boost his immunity and boost the way he was coping with a disease like MS were just not being effective. And so we really were looking at what life might start to look like, and it was grim.
What was it like in those grim days in the hospital when you didn't know what you were going to find from hour to hour, minute to minute? What was it like to become his voice, where he couldn't say what he wanted and he couldn't tell you at the moment what he preferred? What was it like to take that tremendous responsibility on your shoulders?
I will tell you that every day in the hospital was devastating. For people who maybe haven't read the book yet, Joel and I made the decision together to walk into the hospital. He had flu-like symptoms for about a week with a very high fever that was fluctuating. But after about 5 days of that, we were like, let's just go we were fluent in MS. We could speak MS fluently. We could articulate it to his doctors. This didn't look like MS. We weren't sure what was going on. But we made the decision together to go to the hospital. He was able to communicate with the doctors that first day. We went to the emergency room. He got settled into a room. Eventually, I went home, came back the next day expecting we would hunker down. The Dodgers were in the playoffs, that we would sit together and watch the Dodgers, and I would be able to suss out what we were doing and how we would move forward. But when I went back the next day, Joel was not the same. And he was barely lucid and coherent. It was such a shock. And things just progressed from there, getting worse and worse. The following day, he was in a coma, and he stayed that way for 3 weeks. So I kind of had two things going on. One, I thought, he's going to get better. They just need to figure out. The doctors were at a total loss as to what it was that was wreaking such havoc on Joel. They really had no idea. But I believed that once the doctors could figure out a diagnosis, that they would be able to make him better. But then there was another part of me that really thought that Joel had had enough of all of this, because that entire year he was suffering so badly with the MS. Like I said, we were facing a very grim future. And we didn't have the opportunity to figure out how we would have managed that. I think we would have. I think if Joel had gone into the hospital, they did some fixing up, and he came home, we would have figured out together how to manage where life seemed to be headed. But we didn't have that opportunity. But because things had been so grim for so long, I just suspected that Joel was sort of tired of all of it. And after some really devastating, every day the doctors were giving me worse and worse news. But there was a part of me that still felt like, well, they still don't know what this is. So once they figure that out, they'll fix him. But that was my mind playing tricks on me.
Yeah.
Because he did get better.
I think, it's very interesting. I mean, holding out hope is a very Jewish approach, right? We want to be realistic. We want to sort of balance the realism as the doctors give us information and as we sort of try to understand that with a sense of hope, never really giving up on that. And we sort of, it goes back and forth between the information we're hearing and wanting to, still have faith and have hope. So I'm wondering for you, were there particular Jewish values or part of your Jewish identity that helped you get through those days in the hospital, that just helped you survive, to be able to go from one day to the next when you really, everything was just coming at you in every direction?
That's so interesting. I will tell you that I took tremendous comfort in the fact that I was in fairly constant communication with our rabbi. Our daughter had been bat mitzvahed 6 months prior. So during her bat mitzvah training, I really felt a connection with the temple and a connection with the temple community and the rabbi and the cantor. And I really felt their support. And the rabbi would call me almost every day. She came to the hospital quite a few times. And just, I felt that my Judaism, like she had me. And it allowed me to sort of process what I needed to. And also really navigate being the person at the hospital, taking in all this information, and then having to relay that information to Joel's parents, to our daughter. I was still taking Sophie to school every day. I wanted to be there to pick her. I wanted to keep things as normal as possible for Sophie, even though her dad was in the hospital. So knowing that, again, that I had the support of my temple and the rabbi, just that was enough for me.
That's great. That's great to hear. I'm so glad to know that your rabbi reached out and that you connected and that you felt that sense of guidance and that sort of sense of support. I'll tell you, as you wrote in the book, and there are so many beautiful moments in the book, I took copious notes as I was reading, but one of the things that Rabbi Hannah said to you, that when you were asking about, well, is everybody praying for the same thing? Not sure that you and everyone else was praying for the same thing, that her response was praying for Joel's best and highest good. I just think that is an incredible concept, praying for Joel's best and highest good. Can you say a few words about that?
Yeah, that was pivotal for me because, well, first, let me just tell you, it's a little bit of a funny story amidst all of this sadness. My friend in the book, Ellie, who I write about, she really was the one who encouraged me to call the rabbi. And I was on the phone with Ellie from the hospital crying and saying, Joel's in the hospital. They don't know what it is. This is very serious. And Ellie said, do you want me to call the rabbi? And I was like, why? Why would you do that? And she's like, because this is what a rabbi does. And I said, oh, if you want to, then sure, call the rabbi. But it was not, it wasn't like my first thought, but I have to give Ellie credit because she's the one who brought that Judaism kind of together for me and calling the rabbi. And that's when Rabbi Hannah came. It was either that day or the next day and said that to me. And the idea was that what I just spoke about a few minutes ago is that I really had like this duality of thought with Joel was going to be okay. And Joel was not happy about any of this. And so when the rabbi came and said, we're all praying for Joel, it really created some conflict for me because I thought we may not be praying for the same thing. And when she said that to me, what we're praying for is what's in Joel's best and highest good, that really freed me up and allowed me to be on the same path as whatever was meant to be would be in his best and highest good.
So let's talk a little bit about the things that people say in those kinds of situations. I like to believe that people have the right intention and that people want to say something that's going to be helpful and healing. But I've certainly experienced, and I can only imagine you have as well, that some of the things that people said to you, although well-intentioned, probably fell short and or were even hurtful. And again, I think everybody probably had the right intention. They wanted to help you feel better and support you and uphold you. And what are some of the things that people said that weren't helpful? And what are some of the things that people said that actually were helpful?
Well, I have two scenes in the book that sort of show both sides of it. I realized early on that because this was so unexpected, Joel's death, and because I live in Los Angeles, but I call it the Village because it's a small suburb, really, in Los Angeles, and we all know each other. Our kids all go to the same school, they go to the same soccer, they go to the same dentist. Like, it's a community of people. We all know each other. That doesn't mean I know these people well. So when I would run into people who heard about Joel, because everybody did, sometimes they would just start crying when they saw me, burst into tears. And again, these were not people I knew particularly well. But one woman in particular came up to me sobbing, like you would think she was the one who just suffered a loss. I was in the supermarket and she came up to me and she was crying and crying and crying. And I'm just kind of standing there. And she said, "I can't stop thinking about you and Sophie." And I said, "Thank you." And she said, "Because I don't know what I would do if it were me." And I was so annoyed. Like,
Wow.
I could have been kinder about it, but at that point, maybe like a month or so had gone by, and I had heard so many things like, people just, again, they were well-meaning, well-intentioned, but I realized I really was sort of like this blank screen for everybody else's fears and projections if God forbid something so unexpected and tragic happened to them. But it was so unrealistic, so she said that to me. I don't know, what I would do if this happened to me or if my husband was the one who had died. And it was just a ridiculous thing. And I just walked away. Like, I honestly, I couldn't give her a response. But then the other thing that people said or would do is they would just say, "I heard about Joel. I'm so sorry." That was enough. I didn't need to hear about, their 86-year-old aunt who just died to try to, relate to me in some way. Or my poor daughter, at 13, so few of her friends had really experienced loss and would say, "Well, when my dog died," or "We had a funeral when our goldfish died." Like, Sophie had nobody to relate to. And people said things to her in a weak attempt to make her feel better, which didn't help, but also just a kind gesture. So I remember I was on that hike in the book, I call it Doing Clooney. And a woman who I knew from the neighborhood, we weren't close, but she just kind of gave me a squeeze. Like, we were passing each other and she just didn't say a word. And that was enough. Like, for me, "I'm so sorry," or "We're thinking about you," is plenty. I didn't need a whole conversation.
It's interesting. I find as, working in the hospice world that I do and going to a lot of families after there's a loss, that there really are no brilliant words. I mean, there's no words that are going to bring instant healing. They just don't exist. I mean, like you said, the hug or just the touch of your hand or just saying, "I'm sorry," that goes a long way. And in fact, in Jewish tradition, we're not supposed to say anything. When we go into a Shiva house, we're supposed to say, "May you be comforted, may you find comfort." And then we're supposed to close our mouths and not say anything, because we don't know whether the mourner wants to talk about their loved one or doesn't at that moment. And as people that are going to perform this mitzvah of bringing comfort, we're really supposed to meet them where they're at. And I think that's just a brilliant Jewish approach.
I think that's amazing. I don't even think I knew that. Or if I did, I forgot.
Fair enough.
But I like that. It's because there are no words, Rabbi. There really is. There's nothing that anybody can really say that's going to alleviate the heaviness of grief.
Right, right. Can you talk a little bit about sort of the very last memories you have in the hospital of saying goodbye to Joel? And
Ah,
I know if you can't, I get it, but if you can, what was that like for you? And again, if you can't, we can move on to a different question.
Yeah, I'll tell you. I mean, it's I feel like Joel was his body was there, but I feel like he had left, his spirit had left
Mhm.
probably immediately when he was in a coma. He was there. I mean, it sounds ridiculous. But for me, being in the hospital was not at all like what we see in the movies where somebody's like curled up in bed around the person, in the hospital bed with the person. I was, even as he was dying, and he was still connected to all these tubes, and like a tube in his nose and in his arms, and heart monitors and brain things. And I was so nervous that I was going to disrupt the wires somehow. I knew he was dying, but I was afraid I would
Sure.
somehow do something that would cause it to, I didn't want to disrupt the medical
Right.
condition he was in.
Yeah.
But it was so surreal. And really, life has not stopped being surreal since he was in the fact that he's no longer here is surreal. But those days in the hospital were really so difficult. I don't know. Looking back, I really don't know how I managed. I don't know how I managed any of it. And I'm so grateful I was able to, but it was really so difficult and very difficult to see him that way. And it was really telling. Joel was in the hospital for 3 weeks, and that last week I invited some of his friends to come and say their goodbye.
Mm.
And I was so used to seeing him like in that hospital room and the bed with all the wires, but like his friends would walk in and they were stunned. And I really tried hard to prepare everybody. Like he's not, he's in a coma. There are a lot of wires and the machines and noise, all of these things keeping him, sustaining him really.
Yeah.
But his friends still came in and they would, I mean, it was shocking because I thought, wow, they're really, I guess I'm just used to this. But it was a shock to see him that way.
I also want to just say that what a kind act it was of you to allow his friends to come in and say goodbye. I spent a lot of time with families, and that not everybody's able to do that. Not everybody is able to. Some people want to close off the circle at that point and not have anyone else in at that moment because for all kinds of different considerations. But the fact that you were able to summon the strength to allow the people that loved him so much to be able to say goodbye, and that you gave them, it sounds like a strange thing to say, but you gave them that gift of being able to, the gift of saying goodbye, because it really is a gift. And some people die suddenly and you're never able to say goodbye. And the fact that you were able to share that with the people that loved him so much is, I just want to tell you, I think that's really a beautiful thing that you did.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I feel like it was important. It also, Rabbi, had to do with, I think, bearing witness. It's almost like I needed the proof too, like that this was real, that this was in fact happening.
Yeah.
It helped me to share that experience with the people who we loved and who loved Joel. And it was really important to me, actually.
That's lovely. That's lovely. I want to pick up 2 comments in the chat, and then I've got a lot more questions for you, but I want to make sure I honor the people that have written questions. So Naomi wants to know, was there one thing in particular that was really, really helpful? Something that someone said or did that you didn't mention already? Because the truth is, a lot of people just are uncomfortable and don't know what to say. Was there advice you would give to somebody, maybe to Naomi's point here, that would be helpful that they could say or do in a time of a loss of a friend or a loved one in their own family?
Well, there were so many things, really. I mean, even what I mentioned before, Ellie saying, let me call the rabbi. And I was like, okay, that was very helpful. Setting up a meal train. I had friends who were bringing me food I mean, I never had so much food. And it was just Sophie and I think I had food for months. But really, one of my friends said to me, and I think that I have a whole chapter on this, but a friend of mine had said to me to choose easy, that losing my husband, and for anybody who has suffered a loss and is grieving, it really is the hardest thing that I think anybody ever goes through in their life, is losing a loved one. It's a profound loss. And because that is so difficult, that every other choice should be the easy choice to make. And by that, I mean, you know, I would use the dishwasher more often than just, again, it was just Sophie and I. And even when we were a small little family of 3, but I don't know why I just was not like a dishwasher person. But then I was like, you know what? I'm just going to start using that was easier for me than standing there. So it's like those basic things. Or if somebody said, I'm going to the post office, do you want me to drop anything off or pick anything up? And I would say yes. Like, I would accept people's help. That was easier than me going to the post office or the dry cleaner or to Trader Joe's. If somebody offered, that was also really helpful. And I think this is common knowledge in the grief community. But rather than say to somebody, what can I do for you? Just tell them, I'm going to come over Tuesday at 6. I'm going to drop off dinner, or I'm going to take your kid to school tomorrow, or I'm going to pick up your kid from this, or I'm going to do this, I'll bring you one. Or just to be more specific and direct, as opposed to just, what do you need? Because what you need is so much.
And you don't exactly know in that moment. What you need in this moment, you don't need in an hour, and you do need in 3 hours.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's really great advice, Melissa.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Let me pick up Lauren's question, or her statement in their question. She said, hearing stories about loved ones is really comforting. Was there any stories that you heard about Joel that you didn't know?
That's an interesting question. No, but I will tell you that when Sophie graduated from high school, one of the gifts I gave her was I sent out an email to everybody we knew, and I asked them to tell me a story about Joel, how they met, or a memory they had, that I then put into a book, and I gave it to Sophie so that she could hear things about her dad that she may not have known. I feel like I knew everything, but maybe I didn't share it all with Sophie. But there was nothing unexpected. I mean, Joel was such a beloved person in the world. He really just had so much love and joy in his life, and so many friends, and he just was really a remarkable person, and he was so funny. And so people told us stories about that, or like bands that he introduced people to, or Dodger stories. And, when people think of Joel, I know they think of 2 things. They think of the Dodgers and they think of music. And what 2 better things, and also his love of family. That was something that came back in this book I put together for Sophie, was how much he loved, our little family.
Yeah, no. That's beautiful. Let me ask you this. I want to get Tim's question in a second, but how did you shift in your mind to setting aside those 3 weeks in the hospital and remembering the happier times? Because people say to me all the time, like, my last image, I can't get it out of my head. Like, seeing them in the bed and seeing them, at the very end, like, it's an image that I just can't shake. How have you been able to shift in your mind to those, to the Joel, Dodger loving, music loving, family loving, and put aside those horrific last 3 weeks?
It's very difficult. And I write about that in the book. It really took me a long time to get that image out of my mind. Took me a very long time just to kind of get out of the hospital. And I slowly realized that, oh, okay, those memories are kind of aside, and I can get on with life a little bit without that kind of haunting me.
So Rollerblade Lady is thanking you for this and saying that a beloved childhood friend passed a few weeks ago, and this is helping her a lot. And thank you. So thank you for sharing that. We're so sorry for your loss, Rollerblade Lady.
Thank you.
And Tim wants to know, So how do you get through life when someone in your family dies? How do you keep going? How do you move on from there?
I think I somehow managed to do it. I don't know how. I don't think there's like a clear-cut answer. I think, again, I had a daughter I was focused on, and that helped me tremendously. And then writing about it.
Yeah.
Writing about this loss was the most healing thing I could have done.
Yeah, I think that's so true, to be able to put it down, and then to even more than some people just put it down, but the fact that you were able to put it down and then share it with the world. And I know that as people, like Rollerblade says, experience loss, we can all relate to what you presented and shared, and the ups and downs, the roller coaster of emotions that you experience from one day to the next. You say partway through the book, we're going to be okay. What does it mean to be okay? And did you believe it?
You know what? It was wishful thinking. I think when I started to say it, I was saying it out loud because I needed to believe it. I needed to believe that we would be okay, because I wasn't sure. I really wasn't sure. But I think being okay means that we would be able to get through this, and really that we would get through it, and we would come out the other side, however long it took and whatever it looked like.
What do you think Joel would have said to you and Sophie about your life going on beyond, without him? What might, if Joel could come back and give you that message, what would he have said to you, and what would he have said to your daughter?
You mean like now or at the time, or
At
just
the time? At the time, and has that changed for even now, maybe?
I think he would say something to the effect of that we're doing everything right.
That's beautiful. That's really nice. So rituals are powerful, right? We have rituals for all kinds of things. And you share with us in the book the ritual that you did with Sophie each night before going to bed, of remembering one thing about Joel. Talk about I know you're going back a little bit, but what was the experience of that? And then at one point she was like, okay,
Right.
I'm done. But talk about like that, creating that ritual, and how you believe it helped you get through.
Well, I think what you're referring to is that we would go to sleep, and before we would go to sleep, I wanted us both to share a memory of Joel, her dad. That was important. And then we would read a passage from a book that I found extremely healing and helpful. And I think in sharing a memory, it helped to keep him alive. And the sad part about that is that our memories started to repeat themselves after a while, because there were no new memories we were making together. So I think that's when Sophie was sort of like, it wasn't helpful. It was like enough for her. And again, she was a teenager. She was a 13-year-old girl.
Yeah.
For 13, 14. It was enough. And but I still found it healing, and I'm so glad that we did that. And I continue to do that for a long time. Reading, it helped put things in perspective for me. And keeping Joel alive, keeping his memory alive, was really essential, I think, to my well-being. And I've continued to do that through writing this book. And even like here we are talking about him and our life together. Like that is something I didn't really see coming. But now that I'm experiencing it, it's such a gift.
Wow. So 8 years later, how often is he in your dreams when you go to sleep and you have a dream about him? And does that happen a lot? Has it happened less or more in the last 8 years, if at all?
You know what? I still dream about him. Sometimes if I wake up in the middle of the night and I go back to sleep, I think, oh, I hope I see Joel. He's still there. He's still there. And I love it. It's really like, it's strange, because sometimes it's disorienting. But usually it's like, it gives me such a feeling of peace.
Yeah. I mean, no question. What about the symbol of the hummingbird?
Yeah, well, Joel loved being in our garden. He loved flowers. He loved, we had a lemon tree. We had like a big garden and roses, and he loved to tend to all of that stuff. He really was like a Renaissance man. And so for his last birthday gift, we didn't know it was his last birthday when he turned 50, but we got him a hummingbird feeder because we would always be amazed at the hummingbirds that would fly around when he was back in the garden. And so I just look at that as a sign. I think a lot of people have signs like that. I've been in a widow group, and some people have butterflies or a fire truck or something that signifies their loved one.
Mm.
And that is what a hummingbird is for Sophie and I.
That's lovely. When my grandma was sick many, many years ago, she told me before she died that whenever I find a penny, that will be a sign from her that she's watching over me and that she's out there and that I'm not alone. And those symbols, those are very strong and very powerful.
I love that. And I think that I've heard the penny thing, and I've heard dimes and little things like that. And I used to feel that with my grandmother, that when I would find a lucky penny, that it was her.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. How would you respond to this statement? Grief is a constant companion.
I feel that's true. I think that it doesn't really leave you. I think you learn to live with grief, and you don't know that in the beginning. In the beginning, it's like something you just want to avoid and not address, but it just kind of sticks with you. And I think, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think grief also is like, I think we feel a sense of heaviness and sadness, but it's really kind of a reminder that life has changed and life is different, but life can still be good.
Absolutely. Talk about the experience of going to a psychic to hear from Joel. What was that like?
That was really important to me in those early days. There was a book that I had read by Claire Bidwell Smith, who works in the grief space. And her book was called After This. And it really was about her and she had a lot of grief in her life as a young person. And she tried to reconcile for her clients this idea that there was an afterlife and that you could connect with your loved ones and that they are always with us. And I believe in psychics anyway. It's not like it was the first time I had ever seen one. But when I went, and I write about it in the book, the psychic that I saw really, it was tremendously comforting to know that Joel was there. She just kind of validated the feelings that I had that Joel was still with me. And I needed to hear that. That was also such a big part of my healing. I know not everybody believes, that's fine. But it was something that I believe and continue to believe. And I feel like it was important to me. And then I could also go back to Sophie and tell her that Daddy is still with us. And I've seen a few over the year, it's been 8 years. I've seen a few psychics, and Joel always shows up. And it's an interesting line of work, I think. But I do believe that our loved ones are still with us, and it's like an energy thing.
Yeah. I'll tell you, in Jewish tradition, it's very, very strongly felt that when we die, our physical body dies, right? And it's our soul that makes us who we are, that gives us our essence, our personality, that our soul survives, and that our soul, returns to God, the source of all being, or returns someday in another body. But the thinking is very, very strongly, we don't talk about it a lot because we're so focused on this world, but that we are going to see loved ones again, and that souls that we travel with in this physical world, we are someday going to see again. So the question is, do you believe that you will one day be reconnected with Joel in a soulful way?
I absolutely do. I mean, it sounds a little morbid, but to say this, but I can't wait. Like listen, I have hopefully a long life ahead of me, and lots of life left to live. But I do believe that he and I will have a reunion one day.
Well, you are supported by Jewish belief.
Love that.
um, let me ask you this. Let's talk a little bit about Marcos. Seems like
Yes.
an incredibly special human being to realize that he is never going to replace Joel, but that he plays another role in your life and in Sophie's life, but that it's not in place of, it's in addition to. Talk about that. And also you mentioned that, for a while you felt judged for being with him. Like,
Yeah.
is there like an appropriate waiting time? Or I mean, should there be an appropriate waiting time? How does that work?
I think you're the best person to ask about the appropriate waiting time. The thing with Marcos is we knew him. He was our daughter's guitar teacher. And so we weren't close. I knew him, in a professional sort of capacity, but he was always a great person. And I'm trying to figure out like where to jump into the story. But one of the things that I really appreciated about him was like everybody at the time asking me, what can I do to help? What do you need? There was something I did need his help with, which was we had a ton of music equipment and I didn't know what to do with it. And I was starting to clean some things out. And he started to help me with that. And what I realized is that unlike everybody else, whenever I was with Marcos, he spoke about Joel so easily and so he was so comfortable in bringing up Joel's name. Other people would whisper like, how are you doing? Or, and he would just say Joel's name out loud. He, like I said, was just comfortable checking in, asking about us, mentioning Joel's name. And in a way that it was very surprising because nobody else, even my close friends, weren't saying Joel's name. People don't know what to say, as we've been talking about.
Yeah.
But Marcos, there was none of that awkwardness with him. And I appreciated it. And we did get together within a year of losing Joel. And there was a tremendous amount of judgment. And that also played into this idea that I was widowish, because I guess like a real widow would never move on with somebody new so quick. So, but ultimately, it was similar to like some people said the exact right thing, some people said the wrong thing, but well-intentioned. I think people were just confused.
Yeah.
But ultimately happy that I had somebody in my life. And Marcos really is a remarkable person. And he really is. I write in the book, like he said something to me that he was the man for the job. And he has been.
That's great.
And by that, I think he meant, in the way I interpreted it, was that Joel is still, as we've been discussing, a very big presence in my life. Joel is still my husband. Marcos is my boyfriend.
I think that's well said. I mean, really well said.
We're very connected. We're committed to each other. We're in this beautiful relationship, but Joel is my husband.
I love that. I think that's beautiful. And I think it goes to the fact that we have a lot of love to give, that our love is not finite, it's infinite. And people come into our lives and there's different kinds of relationships. And, you can love Joel to infinity and beyond and also love Marcos. And one is not exclusive of the other.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. I think that one of the things that makes Marcos so remarkable is he accepts that. He's not trying to, like you said, he's not like overstepping. He's not trying to come in and be, Sophie's dad. He's a very good friend to her, but he's not, trying to be something, take a role that's not his. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes total sense. So I don't want to be invasive, but I do want to ask a question about Sophie, and you should answer only what you're comfortable with. But this is my question. How did the experience of losing her dad so young shape her view of the world, shape her personality, shape her relationships? She seems very well adjusted from everything in the book. I mean, she seemed like, obviously it broke her heart in so many ways. She lost her daddy. But I mean, you kept her on the straight and narrow and really became a second parent to her, a mom and a dad in some ways. But how did that shape who she has become and is still becoming? Because we're all still becoming.
Well, I love that. We are all still becoming. Thankfully, she has such strong memories of Joel. Joel was such an active and engaged dad. He was not like a weekend kind of dad. He was every day present in her life. They had such a strong bond.
Mm.
And she may not remember specifics, but she remembers the feeling of him and his love for her.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful for that. And I think being the only parent has been a huge responsibility. And I just try to channel Joel and really think what he would say, if she's having a rough day or something's difficult for her. I try so hard to offer my opinion and advice and also what Joel would say or want for her. And I think she feels that too. Again, I've worked so hard, Rabbi, to keep Joel present in our lives. So it's not a stretch for her, I don't think, to imagine what he would want for her.
Talk about the idea that time is a miraculous healer.
Yeah.
How has that been a reality for you?
I think because in those early days, you just think you're not going to survive it. The grief is so difficult and you feel so sad and I thought I was depressed. And a family friend who happens to be a therapist. So Joel died in early November, and it was Thanksgiving. And this friend happened to be at our Thanksgiving dinner. There, I was at my in-laws, and I said, "I think I'm depressed." And she's like, "Melissa, you're grieving."
Right.
And I thought, "Oh, okay. So this is what grief feels like." But I didn't know, as silly as that sounds. So I feel like in time, those feelings have subsided, but you don't know that in those early days.
Right.
You feel like you're just going to live in that place forever.
Yeah, no, you do. I mean, if you're living literally, as the psalmist says in Psalm 23, living in the valley of the shadow of death.
Yes.
The shadow, even if you're not in the valley, the shadow follows you to a certain extent. I mean, and you make the decision when you're ready to sort of lift that, and sometimes as hard as you try, you fall back into it because it's not linear.
Right. It's not linear. It's unexpected when it hits you, like we talked about. And but it is something for me anyway. When I say time has been a miraculous healer, it's been 8 years. But listen, I had a really rough time. Joel's yard site, came. I honored him. I acknowledge it. But his birthday this year really was difficult for me. I don't know why. Last year wasn't. This year really was. So that's what I mean. It's just you don't know when it's going to hit you or why or what might trigger that sort of grief reaction.
Right. And you'll never know. You'll never know till you arrive there and sort of, have to live in the moment, right? Live in that moment.
Which goes back to grief being a constant companion.
Right.
It's just kind of always there, sometimes worse than others.
Yeah. So tell us about, again, what you're comfortable sharing, your in-laws, like Hal and Rita and Nancy, Joel's mom, and are you still in touch? Do you get together? How has that evolved? And how is sort of, how is the situation, I guess, over the years, gotten to a place? Have they been accepting of Marcos? What role do they play in your life at this point?
I love talking about them because people are so curious. Yes, we are very close. I talk to them all the time. I see them all the time. Joel's mom, I think, I can't speak to the loss of a child. I say in the book, it doesn't matter if your child is 5 years old or 50 years old. It's an unbelievable loss. And I think they clearly were both all devastated by losing Joel. And again, it was so unexpected. But all of that said, we have all moved forward and they are very much a part of my lives. They have embraced Marcos so lovingly, which is also such a gift and so meaningful. I have widow friends where that is not the case with their in-laws. They are active in Sophie's life. It's really, I feel very fortunate in that way.
Hmm. Does the widows group still get together today?
Like sort of an offshoot, the one that I started and ran with my friend Allison has kind of individuated. Like there are groups of us, but then there are other groups that started from our group. And in fact, I think there's a meeting in a couple of weeks I'm going to.
Okay.
But I love it. And I love just, there are a lot of younger widows out there, and I feel like there's such comfort and community. And it's so nice that we can sit together and share our experiences. And, I was in an event the other night and I had to give a little tiny speech, and somebody commented, yes, and Melissa wrote this beautiful book, Widowish, about losing her husband. And the entire crowd went like, like you hear this audible gasp, which I'm used to. But it doesn't feel great. And that doesn't really happen when you're with a group of widows. Like we're starting out on the same playing field. Like we've all suffered a devastating loss at a young age. And there's comfort in that in a weird way.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine everybody tries to understand, but you can really, truly only understand if you've gone through the experience.
Yeah, it's true.
So what do you miss most about Joel as you sort of like, look at the whole experience of your lives together, everything you've gone through, and now sort of, with a little bit of being able to sort of look at the perspective maybe on high, what do you miss most?
I miss everything. I miss absolutely everything. I miss his laughter. I miss his patience, his loving support and understanding. I mean, he really got me as a person. And I think that's what, when you marry somebody, that's you get each other. And I feel like he just really got me and understood me in a way that I really miss. And I miss his parenting. I miss sharing our parenting responsibilities. I miss everything. And again, that's, it is interesting to sit here and talking about my book and Widowish and all of this stuff, because as much as I miss Joel, I have moved forward in my life. And that's the thing too. You don't move on, you move forward. I'm not like over Joel. And, people think, oh, because of Marcos, oh, Melissa's fine, she's got Marcos. No, Joel is my husband. I miss him profoundly, but life has moved forward and life is good.
I love that. I think, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, I think it's important for people to know that, because it is so sad. But life is good.
Yeah. I love the way you say it. You don't move on. He's still your husband, but you do move forward, and you can do both at the same time. And I think that's just so right on, Melissa, and so beautiful. Let me ask you one last question. What I like to talk to people a lot about, especially in the end of life realm, about life and legacy. The legacy that people leave behind. In particular, what lives inside of you that was a piece of Joel, that Joel taught or embodied, or what lives in you that might not live in you because of Joel?
The love of the Dodgers. For real. I mean, I may not keep up with every game, but like in a general sense, so much, really. I mean, he was such a patient and kind and decent person. And I try to remember those things when I'm feeling impatient or not so kind. I really, my friends and I laugh at like, what would Joel do? I think about that. What would Joel do? And I think that a lot in a lot of different situations. So, yeah.
Got it. Let me pick up one last comment from Rollerblade Lady, who wants to, she says, I have a dear friend whose husband died 7 years ago. She's diagnosed with complex grief disorders, and coping is difficult. Any suggestions of what I might do to support?
That is a great question. I think just being there. for your friend is important. That, you know, like I had a lot of friends that I could rely on. And sometimes it would just be what you said, Rabbi, about Shiva, is like they would just sit with me and that we wouldn't have to talk, but just knowing that somebody was there with me physically, that was a lot. That was helpful.
That you are not alone, that
Right.
people love you and they care about you, to hold your hand and help you realize that, you know, they'll be there for you and really be there for you.
Right.
Is there a way that you sort of make sense of all of it, to sort of that which does not make sense at all as you sort of look at it? But how do you make sense of the senseless, I guess, is the question.
I just accept that I can't. I accept that, like I said, life is surreal. It continues to be surreal. There's no making sense of any of this. I can't believe it. I can't believe that Joel is not here. I can't believe that he has missed the past 8 years of our life, our daughter's life. It makes no sense. So I just, like I said, I just try to, okay, it's senseless.
Yeah. So do you have future projects?
I think I do.
You don't have to share.
Yeah, I've always, I say this, you know, I've always made my living as a writer, so I will just continue to write. I'm not sure what will be next, but there'll be more.
Is there anything to say about your earlier years of writing, the things that you enjoyed doing, and, you know, any particular like career highlights? People might want to know if there's any career highlights.
You know, it was a thrill working in television for as long as I did. I worked on some really tremendous shows and received a lot of accolades for the work that I did. But Hollywood is a rough business, and publishing has been very different for me. It's been much more inviting, and people seem to be much more appreciative of the work that I'm doing. And it's so meaningful, clearly, to have written a memoir. For me personally, I didn't see it coming. I was writing essays and I felt like, you know, those were some highlights, having my essays published in places like the New York Times and the LA Times and the Washington Post. And it's just, I feel that somehow my writing is always the thing that I come back to and is always the thing I find most healing. And so, yeah, there'll be more.
Great. Well, we'll look forward to that. Well, this has been so special and so wonderful to have this conversation with you. And I want to thank you so much for putting this out in the world and helping so many people through your words and sharing, obviously, a very difficult experience and in your life. Is there anything I didn't ask? Is there anything I should have asked, or anything else that you want to say as we conclude?
No, I think this was great. I so enjoyed talking to you, Rabbi. I think this is so nice to be a part of this book fair. And I just want to thank you so much.
Well, thank you very, very much. And thanks, everyone, for watching and being part of this today. I want to just mention your website, unless, Brenda, you're going to do that, which is widowish.com. I encourage everybody to go to it. And if you have not yet had the opportunity to read this incredible book, you need to read it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Melissa and Rabbi Krakoff, for being with us and for such a heartfelt discussion. And thanks to all of you at home for joining us. Be sure to log on to our website where you can purchase Melissa's book. Our next event is Ticking Clock, Behind the Scenes at 60 Minutes by Ira Rosen, which is this evening, Monday, November 8th at 7 p.m. And remember to like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and visit our website at culturalarts.jccdet.org book fair for our full schedule and ways to get involved. See you tonight.